World building, it's a lot of fun. Hey guys, welcome to the Editing Bar, the channel that brings you writing tips that make sense. I'm super glad that you guys are here, and we are going to be talking about my favorite subject, which is world building. Now, we're going to talk more about world building basics and not so much about the really nitty-gritty in-depth details. So if you like that kind of stuff and you like writing tips, make sure that you go down, hit that little like and subscribe button and the bell notification so that way you get updated on when I upload videos, which we're going to have a new schedule. Is going to be every other Friday to allow me time to bring you better content. All right, now let's get into the good stuff. So the first thing we're going to dive into today is the 4 C's of world building. Now, this is my own personal thing that I've kind of come up with to help me as I world build, especially in my fantasy stories. But you can take this and apply to any type of fiction that you want to. Now, the first one is creatures. This probably is going to pertain more to paranormal, urban fantasy in some cases, fantasy obviously, and science fiction. But essentially what you want to do is you want to figure out what kind of creatures are going to be in the world. Some of these are going to happen naturally and organically as you write. But you want to do a little bit of prep work beforehand. What is going to be some of the creatures? I'd say pick 3. Pick 3 of the ones that you're like, yes, I absolutely have to have these in there because reasons. Then as you flesh those out, you're going to start really building the world around your characters. So if you're doing something that is in fantasy or science fiction, you want to have 3 big cool creatures at a minimum, I would say. Now, not every story has to have these, but it can be a lot of fun to write. Now, they need to have purpose as well. They need to be interacting with the characters. They need to be part of the cultural lore, or they need to be part of the planetary systems, depending on what genre you're writing in. So make sure that you go through, you think about what those are, and then you add those. Then you add just kind of the normal everyday creatures, which is, cats, bears, dogs, mice, rodents of unusual size, the normal things. You want to make sure that you have things that people can relate to, because not only does your world building by having the really cool creatures make it more exciting, you also have relatability for the readers for things that they already know and are familiar with. Next up is going to be cultures. Now, this is where you design cultures around the world settings that you're creating. And why it's so important, especially if you haven't done a map of any kind, then you want to kind of draw out the map and get the lay of the land. You want to know what it is that your characters are going to be doing and where they're going to be walking and what they're going to experience in terms of terrain. Now, that is in a more detailed video that I will probably make in the future, but it still pertains a little bit to the cultures, because the cultures are going to be affected by their surroundings. If you have people that are close to the sea, you're probably going to have a more seafaring society. If you have a more nomadic tribal style culture, then maybe they're on the plains, similar to the tribes of Mongolia. Maybe they're like the Bedouins who are in the Sahara, or they're like the Amazonian tribes. You have to think about which culture is going to fit where in the world and how that is going to impact them. Then you want to figure out some of their customs, some of their norms, some of the things that they do on a daily basis that makes their culture what it is. And even though you have one set thing for a country, that doesn't mean that it's not going to change the closer you get to a different country. For instance, I live in Oregon, but if you go down to California, it's real different. It's like an entirely different universe. If you go up to Seattle, also very different. We're still in the United States, but some of the norms will differ. So even though we're on the same seaboard, we differ in some of the things that we do. If you go from the west side of Oregon to the east side, it's a huge culture difference. So you have to be thinking in those terms. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get really nitty-gritty unless you're writing it super realistic. But taking some of that and applying it is really going to help you build a culture that is more fleshed out, and it's going to be a lot more interesting. Next is creation. Creation is essentially the world around them. And that's where you get into more of the terrain, the flora, the fauna, the kind of stuff that you're going to be putting the characters through. You need to have a general idea of what's around there. So be thinking of what types of flowers, what types of plants, bushes, trees, rocks, terrain. Those kinds of things are smaller in detail, but they have a bigger impact. For instance, if your group is going over a rocky pass, well, it's going to be a little treacherous. It's a mountain pass. There's usually snow. You have to take these kinds of things into consideration when you're doing your world building if you want to have a more fully fleshed out world. Lastly, it's conflict, which is pretty much the entire point of a book. But I break it down into several different categories, and I won't get super detailed in this video about it, but the basics of it are you have the global conflict. So even if you are planning on doing just a very small fraction of that conflict, you need to still know what's going on the bigger picture. It's super important. If you have multiple kingdoms, then you need to make sure that you know what's going on in those kingdoms as well. It may not come into play in the story, but you just still need to have an awareness of what would be happening. Is there civil war brewing? Are they attacking a different kingdom? Who knows? But it might have an impact. And it may just be that the characters that your people run into are from there, and they have a story to tell. Doesn't have to be super detailed, but it can make your world feel much bigger than it really is if you're only focusing on that small fraction. Next is national. And at a national level, that's more where you're dealing with a single kingdom, some of the political machinations in that kingdom. You focus in on what is going on there. Is the crown prince trying to overthrow his father, the king? Is the evil chancellor trying to overthrow everybody and become the ruler? Those are the types of things that you want to make sure that you're thinking about on a national level. Maybe the barons are mobilizing to try and take out the monarchy because really they're just ticked off. Lastly is personal conflict. And this is where I really enjoy writing, is the personal conflicts that can take place in the grander scheme of things. But because it's personal and because it's the character that we're looking through, watching them deal with the conflict from a global or national level internally makes it so much more relatable. If we look at the state of the world today, we all have internal conflicts about the state of the world. We all have set beliefs about the stage on which the world is playing out. So your character should reflect that same type of conflict. The things that they stand for may stand juxtaposed to someone else. How does that play out? How do their personal conflicts come into play when it comes to the plot? Are they opposed to doing what the plot says? Do they really want to rescue the princess? Do they really want to rule a kingdom? If the answer is no, you have conflict. Congratulations. But make sure that it's realistic conflict. So often when people work on world building, where they fall short is that they focus on just the big things and they miss out on the smaller details. And the small details is really where it's at when it comes to world building. Sure, you can have the cool stuff, you can have knights, you can have dragons, you can have castles and epic battles. But where the world building really comes down into play, at its very core, is the people. We make up the world as much as the world affects us. You have to understand and look at the state of the world that we're in today and try and translate that into your story. You have to understand what's going on in the world, and it will help you write better. When you go out for a walk, look at what people are doing. Ask yourself the questions of what their day is like. What might it look like to be them for just a moment? What would it look like to run through the trees while being chased by a wolf? Think on how you want the world to feel, not look. Looks are cool, admittedly so. But what the world makes the reader feel is what makes it real. That rhymed. I'm a bard. That's what I do. So remember that. The 4 C's: creatures, cultures, creation, and conflict. And what the readers feel makes it real. All right, guys. I'll see you later.